Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Today, we're sitting down with Jeppe Persson, who leads Scania and Scania's venture arm built to accelerate the shift to a sustainable transport system. Jessica has built her career at the intersection of industrial transformation, M&A, and venture, and she brings a rare global perspective to it. Today, we will start with her personal journey and how it has shaped her worldview. Then we'll go deep on how Scania thinks about the forces reshaping transport and how Scania Invest is structured to act inside that environment. And of course, and this is very interesting to me, how their scenario-based strategy models the future. We'll finish with how they balance strategic and financial returns and what building one of Europe's most ambitious CVC platforms has taught Jessica and the team.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
But Jessica, before we start talking Scania, I just want to touch on you personally. You've got quite the story. Tell everyone who you are.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for having me on the podcast. So with Jessica, I'm Swedish by native, but also lived abroad in many, many years. Stayed about 12 years abroad in 6-7 countries, most of that part in Asia, and have a really curious and interest in global systems and what is happening right now with geopolitics, but also the techs and everything else going really, really quickly, and how we can be part of that going forward to shaping the next era of technology and business for Europe, but also for the world.
Jessica, you blew me away in our last conversation. Tell me a bit about, I believe it's the Middle East, and how the Middle East has shaped how you think.
Yeah, I think there is currently specifically, but since many years, has been a little bit of focus for the different regions, and we are moving away from the globalization part. On my side, since I always see myself as a global citizen, I was raised in Singapore for multiple years. I went to university in Singapore, but also lived in multiple places in Europe, and also spent a lot of time traveling the world in I don't know, close to 70 or 80 countries or similar. And I think there's so much innovation and curiosity and things happening all over the world. So I think we can't really say that this side is good and this side is bad, but rather I think there is a really, really good innovation and drive and in all parts of the world. So Europe has done a lot historically, specifically the US as well, but I think there is more interested spaces now when it comes to the places where are a little bit outside of Europe, and also when it comes to Middle East. There are so many things happening both in Dubai, of course, but then also when it comes to Saudi, when it comes to Qatar, not only capital-wise, but also when it comes to new market, new business models, and new ways of scaling things. And they have the benefit sometimes to be able to do it from scratch, while we in Europe have a legacy of old infrastructure, old way of workings, and different kind of partnership styles, where I think that when it comes to the Middle East, or when it comes to Africa, and when it comes to different parts of Asia, you can start from scratch and you can really take inspiration from those parts of the world. The same, of course, goes for Southeast Asia. The same goes for China. And I think specifically also in Vietnam, I think it's happening a lot of things on the innovation front, and really, really good for different startup ecosystems. And then, of course, in China, everything is going with China speed. So that's also a really, really good ecosystem to be part of.
Yeah, but now I want to shift into talking a bit about Scania. And I think that it's fitting that you just explain to everyone as the external party here, what do you see when you see Scania acting in the market? You're quite seasoned investor in mobility yourself. So talk a bit about that.
My first couple of investments within supply chain were in freight marketplaces. One of the companies that I've become really fond of is a company called Sender, a unicorn out of Berlin. I had one of the founders, David Nothager, in one of my initial newsletters coming out of the LinkedIn profile. And over the many years, I've gotten to know David quite well. What is very noticeable if you look at the cap table of Sender is that you find the Scania brand name in there. For me, it was super interesting to very, very early on see Scania in there. And then over the years, I've kind of hunted down Jessica, and I managed to get on a panel with her at Go West this year. So for me, it shows a lot about, what has the vision been from Scania over the years. But also, when you see a great leader and a great speaker like Jessica, then you're kind of impressed. And there's a lot of topics that we'll touch upon in this podcast that I'm really eager and very, has a high star in my view in the way we look at corporate venturing. So for me, it's one of those great days where there's an awesome guest on the show.
Jessica, well, how did that feel? Did Jeppe do you justice?
Thanks a lot, Jeppe. I was specifically nice and I really liked how you talk about Sender and David. I love working with David. He's an amazing character, and I talked to him a lot also for how to do the next steps and how to work with him. He's an exceptional founder with a really, really good ability to move with the different stages of the company, which is not always the case. And he's extremely strategic minded. So I really, really like collaborating with him and the whole team.
Yeah, and you really see a founder there that is really embracing the supply chain ecosystem. He has done, I think, about 30 angel investments himself. So you also get to know a lot just being around him. So congrats on that investment, Jessica. Very well done.
We've actually had David on the podcast in his capacity as an angel investor because he's quite prolific there as well. What a person. Anyone that hasn't yet met David and Sander should definitely make sure to listen to that episode, though it is by now 2 years old. Tell me a bit about the journey of Scania Invest, because you come from having, and I don't know if I put this completely correctly, but having outsourced quite a bit of your venture activity to now having taken a lot in-house. Can you talk about that transition and how you're moving?
Absolutely. I think in the beginning here, I'm a little bit estimating because I was still based in Asia at this time. But around 2017, it was Henrik Henriksson and the team. It was then heading Scania to decided also to be more making sure that Scania should always be in the forefront of all technology tipping points. And I think the kind of good first approach is always to go a little bit scouting, do a little bit outsource, was very much focused on different era of venture capital where it was much more SaaS and much more e-scooters and that kind of feeling. And I think at that point of time, it really makes sure, it made sense to have it outsourced. Then when I came back from first Asia, being CFO of Asia Pacific, but then also working a lot in DAF for multiple years, and also with strategy for a lot of years, we saw a shift coming into the venture capital space where it's much more moving into deep tech, and it's much more moving away from generalist venture capital to specific strategic partnerships approach, where I think that is really, really makes sense to be global in all the different parts of the ecosystem around the world, and much more closer to universities and much more close aligned with the different cap tables to make sure that you have an aligned end vision of where and how long that marathon, which it usually is for deep tech, is supposed to look and how much money is needed for that transition. And there's also so much more complexity with the deep tech companies when it comes to industrialization, when it comes to operational problems for licenses or supply chain, and apart from all the normal liquidation kind of issues and customer and scaling and so forth. And so in that phase, we said, let's complement the outsourced version that we have and really go more into Middle East, both with towards Israel, towards Qatar and other places, but also towards UK, towards even more into DACH, but also then going into Singapore, towards China, towards the US and Canada, of course. We look at about 3,000 companies per year, and we invest in maybe 6 to 8, but we really, really want to be close to those companies, more partnership approach, and really work close with the other parties also on the cap table to make sure how can we scale this, not short term, but long term, and make sure that everyone brings something to the table. Either it's big capital or you bring operational knowledge or market access. But I think it really comes to an area as well where every single person on that cap table has to know why they're on it and what they're bringing to the table. And I think also startups should ask for that.
I think it makes a super important point about corporate venture and how that when markets are changing, and thus the technology is changing, while you as a corporate might be engaged with venture, and it might make sense in one era, so to say, to be doing it in an outsourced function, to be a bit more hands-off or one step removed from the activities. Things can change in the market that then make it super pertinent that you get it closer in-house. Yeah, but maybe you can talk a bit about that, because I think this is also a bit of the reason why we're seeing such a big increase in activity when it comes to corporate venture in Europe, because a lot of our industrials are realizing exactly what you're describing here, Jessica, that VC is becoming about brick and mortars as well as bits. And for that reason, we really have to now get into it as corporates.
No, I think we see the shift, right? And I think, over the past year, a lot has changed around us. I think there are two things that we have seen in corporate settings, and is a fact. and that is that people and strategy changes over time. But with the recent developments within AI and deep tech, we see a significant move where corporates can now see how big a part they can play in this startup ecosystem, because it's everything about value creation. As Jessica said before, why are you on the cap table? Why are the different investors on the cap table? And it's for sure that the corporates are there to spread the words around, what can you do with their asset, brand, customer data, and expertise. So for me, it's very, very clear why they're there. And I think that is the new universe that we will see. We will see the corporates being more engaged, specifically from a European angle, in venture capital, because we see that move when we talk to the different stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Jessica, before this podcast recording, I asked you, could you produce some slides that would really give us a framework to be thinking about what we're going to be talking about? One of the slides you shared with us, and we're pulling it up on the screen for those that are watching, one of them is showing your business environment, and it shows 5 different factors that act as global trends that are transformative forces that redefine your industry landscape. One of them is climate change, and I want to dive into each of them. So to those not watching it, one of them is climate change, one of them is political and economic shifts, one is social shifts, one is technology and business shifts, and the final is legal and regulatory changes. This goes to show, I think, how broadly you are engaged as a CVC. It's not just about investing in startups, it's actually about tapping into a very broad economic environment that's changing. Can you talk about each of these just so that people can hear from a CVC lens? How do they affect you? Why are they formative to how you're operating as a CVC?
Absolutely. And I think just there you're making a really important point for us. That's also really why we like to have it in-house, is we report straight to the executive board. We work straight with our CEO and the key decision makers when it comes to R&D, when it comes to production and so on. And we are taking part of all the different road shows and all the different roadmaps for where we're going within Scania. And I think that is super critical to be able to offer back to the ecosystem out with startups also what can we offer or cannot offer, and what is relevant for them to go into that is relevant for the different customers around the world. So when it comes to this slide that you're talking about, so to say, we do always the calibration at Scania where we have a strategy and we have a vision, of course, like everyone else, but we recalibrate that one towards the different scenarios. On that scenario note, we have a few trends right now that is really, really shaping. First, we have the climate change, of course. Everyone knows about the CO2 discussions and everything ongoing there. But then we also have a huge political and economic shift where we see both in a positive way that there is much more economic rise in many, many different parts of the world, which is changing the buyer behavior and so forth, which is really, really good. But then we also see us moving away maybe less good from the global world that we used to be into a much more regional world. And I think in that regionalization, we always have to be present in the different regions because innovation will still exist everywhere, and we need to be able to serve our customers all over the world. Then we have the social shifts where you see a lot more people are getting access to education and all those good things, and you need transportation to be able to secure that everyone is sustainable, kind of safe inside the vehicle, but also outside of the vehicle. And also when it comes to the more congestions and more tightness of the different cities around the world, where everyone is moving more into cities, how can we kind of survive in there without having too much loud vehicles driving around and so forth. But then we also have the technology and business shifts, where we see that technology goes quicker and quicker and quicker. So before each S-curve was a few years, but now we see that the S-curves keep on moving quick, and even new technologies, if the S-curve are quite sharp, and then you need to be on the next one. And it's also quite expensive then to be able to develop everything of that in-house. So I think a lot of companies are either moving to conglomerates, being extremely big, but most are then also working more as partnerships where you need to collaborate with different customers, with society, with universities and startups, and also even your competitors. There we can see that you can, so to say, compete when it comes to customers and products, but you can still collaborate when it comes to system enablers and making sure that good technology, for example, scales in a very efficient and productive way. And then, of course, the legal and regulatory changes. Right now, we have the customs in the US, which everyone is, of course, aware about, but then also different kinds of, even within EU, where it's been quite regulatory complex for a lot of companies coming in here and to invest here and also to collaborate within the EU. And I think there we have in EU specifically, we have super good technology. We're really, really good at industrialization, but then we are slowed down when it comes to legal and regulatory collaboration possibilities. A lot of that is being worked on right now, and we are, of course, following these different shifts, both from a venture capital perspective, both from an M&A partnership perspective, but then also, of course, from our customer perspective. And I think also here, it's really, really valuable to work with, either us, but otherwise one of our competitors or one of the other big companies out there, because I think there are very few companies in the world that are more knowledgeable when it comes to dealing with regulatories and shifts around the world. I mean, most of the big companies around the world, specifically in Europe, has been operational for over 100 years, and we're very well versed how to deal with massive inflation or customs pressures and industrialization in very tricky environments.
I think what's interesting here for me with my corporate lens on, right, is that we know intuitively from the venture capital ecosystem that there are significant movements that counts when you do investments as a corporate, right? But oftentimes it's kind of like when you talk to VCs, they don't do the full deep dive to understand what is it that the corporates really bring. When I hear Jessica talk about these 5 points, right, they're all super valuable. They are super meaningful in everything what's going on in the world. But I also know they move, right? Because I think, Jessica, if we had spoken 2 years ago, right, we would have discussed a lot about climate change. I think when we discuss today, we will talk about basically all 5 elements you have up there, because it's a really changing world that we have right now. Well, what I would like to just, a part of the process and the way we operate as CVCs, right? You also have your investment proposals. Can I ask, are these directly in your investment proposal? Is this topics that you address when you want to do your investments?
It depends on which angle. I think for all of our investments, we always, of course, see how will these startups be affected by these? How prepared are they to the climate change items? How prepared are they to handle political and economic changes, like when it comes to supply chain and when it comes to geopolitics and so forth? And where in the world are they located? And so it's more, I wouldn't say that it would, again, depends on which angle here, but I think not everything is ruled out based on these, but I think it's always kind of integrated when we discuss with the startup companies or the portfolio companies, how do we want to integrate? What can we promise them and what can we not promise them? And what do we think that they need for scaling? For example, if you want to go in China as part of your strategy, we have a lot of good access in China. We also have that in different parts of the world. We are in 130 plus countries locally with their own people. So I think it's more together with the different startups. How prepared are they? Where do we see a gap? And is that a gap that we can fulfill, or should we invite someone else on the cap table to be able to fill that gap? So it's more that kind of discussion. And I think in general, that is also something we look at when we invest in the different startups, like how easy is it to talk to them, and when it comes to industrial empathy, to understand, their challenges and how much you can do and where you need potentially to change, but also how quick is your learning curve when it comes to learning new stuff and pivoting and adapt. And also how much focus does the startup have on here and now, kind of closing the gap of the next fundraise, whereas they also need to have a lot of focus on the big ecosystem or system view for being able to survive for the next 5, 10, 15, 50 years. So I think that kind of maturity in the decision power of the founders and so forth, that is also something we look at when we go through these kind of...
For sure. What is your take on, oftentimes when we talk to corporates, right, we also end up in a discussion whether you are a strategic or financial investor, right? I think at this point of time, nobody is doubting that everybody is doing financial investments. It's just more how you talk about it. The different places where I've been more engaged, like with Maersk and other companies, when we have this discussion, right, we do a standard financial investment proposal, and then we actually have on the side, an analysis on how this is going to influence the corporate. Do you do it the same way, or what is your take on strategic versus financial investments?
For us, they're actually 100% the same, because I think for us, we really want, if I talk to my executive board, they definitely want strategic insights. They want the technology tipping points, what's happening in the markets, which different markets around the world for consumer behaviors is changing and why and so forth. But to get the best technology insights or the best strategic insights, you also need to be on the best cap table and work with the best companies. And to do that, you need to have huge financial incentives and as well. So for us, we we definitely want super high financial returns, and we want that because we want it for the financials, but definitely also because we don't see that we otherwise can fulfill the strategic returns. So for us, they are very much aligned, and we would never do an investment purely from a strategic return. In that case, since I work both with M&A, I work with more private equity-like investments. I also work with joint ventures and partnerships, and then I have my different venture capital arms. So in that case, we would rather have a partnership, or we do some other kind of supplier collaboration, or we do some kind of other strategic commercial investments with that company, as we can still choose that option, but then never within the VC. When it comes to the VC, we're 100% want to be aligned with everyone else on the cap table. We never want to go in and buy that company. We never want to mess up the cap table. We want to be aligned with the cap table and make sure that everyone gets the target, so to say, getting the financial returns as well.
Jessica, I would love to ask you to go a bit into presenter mode here, because we have a lot of corporates tuning in that are trying to figure out what should their operating model be to drive both financial and strategic returns. We've oftentimes on the podcast had these meta conversations back and forth on how you do it, but you actually have a full-fledged model that we're pulling up again on the screen here for those that are watching. But I'd love to hear, like, if you could explain to everyone exactly what we're looking at and how you're thinking about and how it's affecting how you built the CVC.
Please feel free also to share it, of course, afterwards on your links and so on for the podcast,
Yeah, for sure.
if anyone wants to discuss it further. This one, as I see it, is not, of course, rocket science, but I think for us it's really, really important. And maybe before going to that one, I think the overarching theme for us is to be authentic, that you really mean what you're saying, and that you really have that kind of traction. I think that some people that I meet in CVCs or VCs, they've been operational maybe for 1 or 2 years, but they haven't really done the operational stuff themselves. So I think also being a startup or being someone who wants to collaborate with an investor in any way, really do that due diligence and make sure what have they done themselves, what have they not done, and how much operational have they been. Because I think you really need to be operational to be able to help other people being operational and really scale. But as we see it, we work then with different kind of feeders. We work with universities, both like ETH, with KTH, and we work with NUS in Singapore. We work with a lot of other universities that we have specifically targeted around the world. We work with specific investors. Again, we have probably contacts of 100, 200 investors, but then we work very curated with like 15 or 20 of those on a weekly basis, where we really want to discuss and where we really love to collaborate. We also work with a lot of corporates. We don't really care who we work with there, as long as it's legally allowed, so to say. So we want to work with the best there. So where it's possible, we also then would like to work with our competitors, specifically then for enabling the system, which is really needed then to enable the scaling to be. We always then compete on products and on customers, of course. But then to really make sure that the system scales, I think that it really makes sense to collaborate with other ones in your industry as well. Work with accelerators like Sting, of course, and others around Europe and the world. We don't have so many collaborators around the world in that one yet, but specifically in Europe, of course. And then we always get feedback from our customers. But then also sometimes you get blind spots. Some customers are really well versed when it comes to the next stages and what they need there, but that's also different in different parts of the world. What we really want to offer, which is then a lot of this is the normal that everyone says, you need to have industry and technology expertise, and you have your brand and so forth. But for us, we really think that we have a brand value that is, we've been in operation for 130 years, we never made a loss making year, and we are ourselves then operational in all these countries. We really think that we can offer deep insight to what is needed and how you scale when you're going into Asia or Brazil or different parts of the world. But then also when it comes to industry and tech knowledge, myself, I've worked about 25 years in this industry. I have direct contact with about, I would say, somewhere maybe 50 to 100 experts in our field, which are PhD then when it comes to materials, when it comes to batteries, when it comes to cyber, when it comes to different other fields, apart then from industrialization, how to ramp up, which is very different if you do it in-house, if you work with a partner for industrialization, and how do you choose that partner then, and how do you do procurement, and how do you make yourself OEM ready? Because I think that if you're a startup that has managed to work with either a company like OEM like Saab or some of the military, like US military and so on, or you work for a industrial company, an OEM, which is also world-class around the world, I think that you're basically then prepared to do whatever kind of partnership after that, because it's safety critical and it's really important items that we work with when you go into autonomous and electrification and so on. So if you manage that to be an OEM supplier, then I think you're ready for a lot of other partnerships as well. But then you really have to stress test and see that the people you're talking to, do they have the knowledge for what you need? And do they have the knowledge and possibility to assist of you getting that access to POCs or pilots or other kind of expertise help?
Yeah, so these are, of course, your core building blocks. You started describing the feeders, which is where you're getting your deal flow from, so to say. And then you described afterwards the venture capital operating model for you, which is built around three core building blocks, being industry and technology expertise, premium brand with a global presence, and of course your best-in-class production and scaling knowledge. That's kind of your right to play, your right to invest, your right to be on the cap table of the founders. And then I'd love to ask you, because you've also got a segment here that's called portfolio, that you break up in Horizon 1, 2, and 3, and then you're talking about there running a process with your portfolio always around tracking, measuring, evaluating, and reallocating. Can you talk about how you work with your portfolio?
Absolutely. For us, we're then divided in, the normal names that everyone knows, Horizons 1, 2, and 3. And it's basically just to have a really good decision ourselves, because I think that if you work with Horizons 1, which is then closer here now, and then Horizons 2, which is more adjacent, or you take Horizons 3, which is more disruptive, making sure that Scania is always then in the forefront of technology, also now and in the future. It has, of course, a little bit of a trade-off when it comes to the risk, when it comes to the time and the duration before you get your money back, but also the interference with core, how much else we're doing in that space ourselves, whilst how potentially in the future is relevant, but then it might be tricky to get enough traction internally to do POCs and pilots. And then, of course, as a trade-off between the financial returns and the strategic returns, if you're then more on a collaboration partnership, or if you're more in an early stage when it's really, really way out there, is some kind of space investments that we are looking at, and also some other more disruptive tech that is going to be quite far away. Then it's more a technology tipping point insights. And then we also need to be open with the portfolio company. Then we can't offer specific POCs and pilot at this stage, but it will become valuable in the next phase. And I think for us, it's really important to make sure that you deliver capital here and now, and also to the for our attraction of the executive board. But it's also super important that we can deliver to the different portfolio companies here and now. So I think that if you stay too close of Horizon 1 and only work with those companies, you will have less disruptive and innovation tech, and then you might be irrelevant from that perspective. If you're too far away, then people will think that in the next downturn, you might just cost money, when are you getting the money back, and then you might not be relevant for that perspective. So for us, we've chosen the model to really each month calibrate where are we, which next investment should we do, which is both then giving the here and now traction, but also then making sure that we actually fulfill what we think is a key thing for venture capital, to make sure that we're relevant for the tipping points for Scania in the next 10, 20 years. And then we also work really, really close then to our executive board, of course, and having them at least on a quarterly basis, we having a deep dive with them and going through the different areas, what we see in the market, what we think is how this is relevant for us and our future strategy, and making sure that both for the startups, both for our executive board and all our stakeholders, we actually give something back to them. And it's not always easy, because everyone has a different kind of wish list, what and when and how much. And not everyone is coming from the basic same understanding also from venture capital. So it is a kind of bridge in there that you have to step on to manage. But we are trying to do that by being very, very thoughtful of which kind of investments we do, and then how and why, and also where in the world.
Yeah, but what does this make you think when you're looking at this model and comparing it with, like, you're a bit of at the same time as you're a practitioner, you're also a bit of a academic student of this?
For me, it's a very mature model. You can really see that they have worked on it for many years. It's really dependent on where you are in the life cycle of your CVC, what you're capable of doing. I have always practiced two things every quarter. I do a ranking session, both for financial and for strategic. The strategic one is very much, how you allocate resources. So for me, you have this amount of full-time employees, you can interact with the core this and that many times. So for me, it's very, very important that you balance that. And I think also, what could be interesting for me, if I were the operator of the model, right, I would look at the 5 pillars that we talked about, 5 minutes ago, right, and see how do they all fit into that, and what is the strategic outcome. Because there's no doubt, right? You need to be financial, give a financial meaning to the corporate, but the strategy is basically going to tell if you're going to survive in the long run or not, right? So for me, I think very, very mature model, and I think a lot of corporates can learn from implementing a similar attitude.
Maybe adding on to that one as well, I think that is also relevant. I think that for us as a person in general, you can never be complacent. You can never relax. You're always on the personal level, on a company level, on the nation level, or in a kind of region level. You always have to be on the next S-curve, right? Because I think it's so easy to think that you're on top of this. We know everything and it's going so well. And then you kind of relax a bit. And I think that I never, ever want to relax in any aspect. So I think that even for this one, we think that we have nailed it. We think that we are working in a really good model, but we keep on iterating it. We are 3 people on the investing side, and right now we have one of the members in our team. He's in China for 5 months, doing a deep dive when it comes to robotics and the Chinese ecosystem. I will also have one person from China joining us for equal amount of time to make sure that we also capture, what's going on in one of the best, most fascinating tech spaces in the world right now. And we are also then continuously talking to and being present also in Brazil, and also then being in the US and other regions, not based there for multiple months, but in general, we try to visit and travel and be for multiple years, multiple weeks per year in the different regions. And I think as a CVC, we also have exceptional access to a lot of those paths, which might not be possible purely from a customer perspective, since we are then allowed to have access to decision makers and universities and policy makers and other industry relevant people in all those different spaces around the world. So we kind of utilize that and try to always also be reinventing ourselves. Then what? What's next? How can we work better?
To add, Jessica, what I've always found useful, which I know a lot of the VCs also use, is to go every quarter when you look at your portfolio, do yourself the favor and going back and read your initial investment proposal and your follow-on investment proposals, to understand what was it actually you invested into and how has the technology developed, how has market, how have, the social impact and so forth developed. So you know where you are, because it's going to give you a framework where you can talk to, where are we in connection also to the pillars that are set out, right, and are cornerstone in everything we do as corporate VCs. So I think the more and more you work with these models, the more clever you become, and you become even more, focused on what do you need to do next. And what I mean here, what do you need to do for the next 90 days, right? Because that is how our industry is developing, right? You need to be on top of everything all the time.
Jessica, I want to ask you a really difficult thing, potentially to square for everyone listening in, because I don't think necessarily it's definitely not non-complex. But I want to try and build a bridge between the scenario-based strategy that you have, where you're modeling out the future, where you're working with 3 concrete scenarios. And then I want to ask you how you tie that in to your strategy and how you're working on different time horizons. So if I pull up one slide for those that are watching again, you've got the scenario-based strategy where you're modeling the future, where you've got a biosphere highway, which is describing a biotech world with intense competition among sustainability leaders. Then you've got another scenario, which is diverging roads, where we'll have a polarized world, where strong nations are focused on power leading their own blocks. And then we've got hyperlocal paths, where we have a local world of reuse economies, micro solutions, and virtual communities. These are the output, so to say, or the long-term horizon that you are working up against in your strategy. I would love to ask you, how do you square this and how does it inform you? And to those that are watching, now we have on the, and I don't think we should talk too much about this slide in specific because it's too complex to describe, but if you have your screen in front of you, you can pull it up and just watch as we talk here, because then it might be easier to understand.
This is then coming from the overarching Scania vision, and our purpose then is to drive the shift towards a sustainable transport system. And that in itself was a little bit too fluffy. I mean, that what is then sustainability? Like, that could be so many angles on that one. So that then is coming down more to explain that when it comes to corporate objectives. It's a little bit more towards the balanced scorecard than going into the different parts when it comes to planet health and when it comes to innovation health that you're always kind of building, when it comes to financial health and so forth. And so that's the corporate objectives. And those we're always then calibrating towards these three scenarios that we work with, where I think one, a diverging road is where we are very much now. It's becoming much more regionalized. And that, of course, has an impact when it comes to our customers' need. How do we get our products to those customers? How do we work with suppliers? How do we innovate? Where should things be located? And so forth. And then the other scenario we had then was the biosphere highway, where you have still very strong players, but it's much more collaborative, very tech-oriented. And then we have the hyperlocal path. The vision and the purpose always kind of stays the same in multiple years, and also that how we calibrate those to the balanced scorecards. But then which way we choose to operate when it comes to production, procurement, and R&D, that one has a different strategy based on these different scenarios. So if we say that the world is super friendly, that of course opens up for us to have a different perspective when it comes to where we produce and then how we operate with innovation and so on. If we're coming to a different kind of world, we might need to own more or be more present or work with a different way. So it's very much steering, and where we see if we want to be market leader or fast follower, and why and how, that is very much decided then by these different kind of scenarios. Then based on this kind of the purpose stays the same and what we mean by that purpose and how that shifts our role based on these scenarios. Then of course we work also then with the yearly targets and then like a bi-yearly or like a few years targets. So I think that one is very much steering the whole of Scania ecosystem, and we really work with this as not as a PowerPoint up on the wall, but we really work on this on a continuous basis. And as a foundation, everything we have then our leadership model, which is very much based then on vision and processes and people and teams. But then coming into the venture capital side where I'm operating, I wouldn't say that our strategy is changing as much when it comes to these different parts. It makes, of course, if we have a diverging roads compared to a very collaborative environment, it will affect where we potentially could go and if people like certain countries or not. So in that regard, we might have to adjust, where we invest and when and how and with which partners and so forth, and also what kind of industries we invest in. But in general, I would say that I really, really believe in a global world where we collaborate globally. And I think that one hasn't really changed based on these scenarios, even though that the world is continuously shifting. But I think also when it comes to startup, for example, the founders there, they collaborate cross borders, across the world, cross industries, no matter, the best founders then, and they have their own kind of networks. And I think that it's also possible then for a CDC to have that kind of network cross borders. So we work with the best CDCs we think, but also other VCs and people who have the same kind of mindset as us when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to trust, when it comes to partnerships, when it comes to where we want to see the world going and so forth. And then our ecosystem, of course, collaborate with the founders and universities and so on. But I would like to think, and that's at least something I push for in my team as well, that we have our view on how we want to behave in the world and where we want to see the world. And we try to kind of stick with that, no matter how the different circumstances change. But we will, of course, adjust certain things. Like if we're not allowed to be in a certain country, we don't go in the country.
I think this is incredibly interesting to see because I spend so much time personally with emerging managers that are building out their investment strategies, pure VC play. And there, you're basically trying to find the Venn diagram between your own capability, your own network, and then what's happening in the market. And then you're trying to solve for where can I create the highest financial returns, which then drives exactly where you're going to end up, so to say, and build your firm around. Here, and I think it really specifies how powerful and how much it changes everything that you, as a CVC, are saying we are strategic. Because that then means that I need to build my investment strategy not only about my company being or my mothership being in transportation, mobility, and trucks, it also means that my mothership has a disbelief of the future. And this is, and that belief system I have to work into. Like it doesn't, because some people think one thing is the future, and then you bet on that, and other people think something else. And it doesn't work, I think, or that would be my assumption, that your corporate has one view, and then as the CVC, you're betting squarely against it. On the other hand, you can say, well, you hedge against it, and what you're betting on is the potential upside.
Yeah, that's a more right thing to do, right? Because I also think it's a matter of how close you are to the core strategy, right? Because when you look at corporate venturing, it does consist of also R&D, right? And then you have the build scenarios, the invest scenarios, and the partner scenarios. So it really depends on where you are. So from my side, the take here, and also what Jessica explained, right, is the key lever of what we do in corporate venturing is around the strategy. And how do we leverage that as a key point when we invest? I don't know what your take is, Jessica.
No, but I think we know each other from a very long time. Also myself and our executive board, we have a really good decentralized kind of working environment where we are allowed to have voice different opinions and so forth. We've worked with each other for over 20 years. So that maybe also help. But I think that in general, we don't really deviate either, because I think both the ground strategy of Scania is very international and global and so forth, and so are we. But I also think there is a point in to allow maybe the venture capital units to be a little more on the corners than in the rest, because I think that is where we're supposed to be, to have disruptive tech and business models and collaboration and so on. We are like these kind of scouting ants that are out trying and testing and then coming back. And if we sometimes fail, it could be, well, it's only the VC unit kind of playing around maybe. But I think also it's a fail fast kind of approach where you can go out and test in kind of safe waters. And then if it doesn't work, then so what? You pivot, you learn, and you develop from that. But I also wouldn't be really afraid to stay firm on the beliefs I really believe in. And I think that I'm super strong when it comes to my opinions and when it comes to do not wobble. I mean, if someone convinced me, of course, to, you miss these facts or you kind of, have you thought about that? Of course, I will listen and try to calibrate my thinking, but I would never switch my strategy just because it's not, so to say, a popular one, or because, it might be better for promotion, something like that. So I think then it's also easier from a VC perspective to sometimes be a little bit more on the corners. And I think that's where we really can deliver value. And if you deliver value, you will have a safe spot.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining on the podcast. You have been absolutely incredible, and I'm sure that you will have an inbox full of people now reaching out to learn from you. Yeah, but thank you for introducing me to Jessica.
Always.
Thanks.